Hello everyone, compliments of the new year. Welcome to Lovelog SA. Please subscribe to the channel and watch my previous videos. Today I've got two special guests, law students, Lihle Bululu as well as Lethabhabo Mogotsi. Hi guys, how are you?
No, we're fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm also fine as well. I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves before we start with the interview. I'll start with you, Lihle. Just give us a brief personal and professional background.
Um, good morning to you, Zach, and good morning to you also, Lethabhabo. Well, as already said, my name is Bululu. I am doing my final year at the University of Forte. I'm not sure about the professional background or anything like that in personal, but yeah.
I leave the professional
yeah.
for now.
And
Litabo.
again, good morning. Again, good morning to you both, and also greetings to all those who will be watching this. My name is Lethabhabo Mogotsi. I'm a Bachelor's of Law student in my penultimate year of study at the University of South Africa.
Right.
And as for my professional background, also likewise with Lihle, also haven't started yet. But we're working on that. We're working on that.
Yeah, still developing that. Okay, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, guys. I just want to perhaps understand, why did you study law? We have a lot of great legal minds in the country who never imagined that they would study law and become great lawyers, but then they became one of the greatest. So just a quick question. I'll start with you, Lethabhabo. Why did you study law? Was it your first choice or you're settled?
Let me start with why I studied law. So initially it was not even my idea. I was told by people that I could be very persuasive at times, and mention was often made of what they would call my linguistic prowess. And I took that very lightly and I paid no mind to it. But then as I grew older, I grew more cognizant of the injustices that our society was marred by. And I often questioned how and what I would do to add value to society as much as I possibly could, and what efforts I would make to help in alleviating these injustices that society was marred by. So additionally, I wanted to ensure that the career path I took would not be one that I would be forced into by circumstance, but it should be one that I would end up loving, you understand?
Yeah.
So when I came to this realization, I started gravitating to law as a career. And in all my years of study, I cannot recall a time when I've ever felt like calling it quits. But then even if the day comes that I feel like, this career is draining me, I hope that my passion for it will be able to sustain me and push me through. And then to your second question, whether I settled or not, well, I have to say it was my first option. I couldn't imagine myself doing anything other than law. And my second option was to take the BA law or the BCom law route and ultimately end up with an LLB. So I feel like my destiny, so to call it, was always channeled in this direction. And I'm happy with the choice that I've made.
Yeah, awesome. How about you, Lihle?
Well, greetings to you guys once again. For me, I'm convinced, like, to a certain extent, that law chose me, because at a very young age, I was said to be smart and quiet. So whenever at home I would share my sentiments, you would realize that they're actually left in awe, to the extent that my grandmom often remarked that you. So I think that subconsciously stayed with me, and I continue choosing it now, because also when I was young, I always wanted to be part of a realm, that impacts the lives of people for the better. So having studied law, I have come to the realization, or rather it has proved itself to be like the medium through which I can give life to that. So that is essentially why I chose law and why I continue to choose it.
Yeah.
And also to answer your second question, it also was my first choice. I didn't settle.
Yeah, and I'm sure law continues to choose you also. So how do you guys balance your social life and your studies? Because legal studies can be demanding. So how do you balance the two? I'll start with you, Lihle.
Okay. For me, like in respect of my first 3 years of varsity, my social life was intentional, right? In the sense that I had a social life and still have a social life that complements and is compatible with my academic life. My friends, in as far as the social life is concerned, are people with whom a foundation I have with them is based on academics, right? In the sense that I have a social life that is founded on us being, or rather having a study group. So it helped me navigate and be able to have people that actually call me out when I'm starting to have a social life that is, that is getting outside of the bounds of my objectives. Am I making sense? So now having people like that has actually made me be able to balance a social life, right, and also my academic life. And now speaking in respect of now my social life now as a final year law student, with the advent of the pandemic, I think I realized that, listen, you only live once, so you might as well have what one would actually say is a social life of a university student. But also without foundation, I am able to discipline myself and say, listen, you've done this much now, but now it's time for you to, get back to it and be able to balance your life. Yeah. So that is my point.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, eh? How about you, Lethabhabo?
Okay. So I feel like, yes, you need to be able to balance your academic life and your social life. And I feel like your academic quests should not keep you out of touch with reality. You can't be studying 24 hours a day and being ignorant to what is happening around the world and in society, your family, whatever the case is. And so the balance is absolutely necessary. I would even say that the balance is also good for your well-being. I mean, it will definitely ensure that you're not being overwhelmed too much by your schoolwork. You get a break from it now and again, and I think this would be good for you physically and also mentally. I think, and can also add that a lot of students have been making mention of how they are suffering mentally. Mental illness is a huge topic now, and I feel like just taking your mind off things, um, taking time for leisure, taking time a bit of time away from your academics, just to revitalize yourself, just to replenish your brain again, to be able to continue with the studies is absolutely essential. And then as for academic records, I think it's definitely advisable to have a good academic record that displays your work ethic. Law is a very competitive field, and a strong academic record will be able to speak for you where you're not able to speak for yourself. And this will also come in handy when you are applying for vacation work and for articles and the like. So how do I balance the two? Okay, being at an open distance learning institution means that you have a very flexible schedule as far as academics are concerned, and the day-to-day requirements are stringent. No, they're not as stringent as at a full-time university. So we don't have to worry too much about the certain number of classes that, for example, that I might have to attend as a prerequisite for exam admission. So this gives me the liberty to plan my schedule to my very own specifications. And for me, this means it becomes easier to balance my social life and my commitment to maintaining a good academic record. And I do admit that the freedom to set up my own schedule is both a good and a bad thing. And sometimes I often do succumb to the negative side of things. But in essence, my formula for balance is very simple. I try to make sure that I break my workloads into fair portions every week, keeping in mind that certain portions of work need to be completed in certain periods of time, so that I can be adequately prepared for my assignments and as well as for my exams. And as for the social side of things, I make sure not to overindulge. People have a common conception that your social life equates to only fun and partying. But I try to extend the definition by seeing my social life as everything. I see my social life as everything outside of my academic life. Um,
True.
so to me, this is inclusive of family time, relaxation, time taken to meditate, time taken to spend some time with friends, outdoor activities. Yeah,
That was a
yeah,
mouthful. You mentioned something interesting that law is a very competitive field, so it requires one to perhaps perform exceptional or in a certain standard that will open doors for you. So, in order for one to achieve that, I understand that you need to have perhaps a study technique or some sort
yeah.
of planning for your studying. So, do you guys have like a specific timetable that you assigned a certain time for your studies? Do you have a specific space that allows you to be more productive? As well as how do you avoid distractions? Because we are at an age whereby there's cell phones, a lot is going on just around us. So how do you like make sure you focus? I'll start with you, Lihle.
I think the essence of mastering a technique is discipline. So what I normally do, I use timetables for me, right? So what I do is, I would say I'm nocturnal. I'm not sure if that's the correct term for it, but I prefer working at like during the AMs. So during the day, what I do is go through assessments, like assignments and everything, and then probably also speak through as to what I will be doing in the AMs. So what I normally do is schedule 2 modules like per day, right? And what I do is schedule a module I find difficult with one which I actually like understand and everything like that, so as to be able for me to be in on it, because it's not every day that you are willing to study, but it's just a thing of having to do it. So for me to be able to get into it, I probably just like start with something I find simple and then move on to the next, right? And what I normally do is go through the content of the module first and then have like an hour in between to just schedule it for case law. So that is how I do my studying. And also, in as far as distractions are concerned, I actually prefer spaces where I'm just by myself. I could never be like, I can't use the library. I can't use a place where I'm exposed to the next person. So what I normally do is just find areas where it's just going to be me by myself and I'm doing my own thing. I remember where I stayed for the past 3 years, there was a study room like underground. So we didn't have Wi-Fi network or anything like that. So I had to make sure that I'm prepared every time I'm intending to go study, like download everything I'm gonna need. And then once I get there, it was just a matter of me studying throughout. And also, I think because there's wisdom, right, in being, being aware of your surroundings, because we didn't have lifts like in my residence. So the idea of me having to go up to get Wi-Fi and everything on its own was just tiring. So I had to make sure that, I make sure I download everything I'm going to need, and I just go there and do what I'm intending to do and study. So that's how I do it.
That's working smart, I guess. Lethabhabo?
Okay, so first and foremost, when it comes to study timetables, I've come to learn that time management is extremely crucial, and once you've mastered the art of time management, the balance becomes second nature to you. And that when that balance is there, it becomes easier to maneuver through your study timetable and to balance your day with other things. But then the issue of study techniques is always been a question that beckons, because I think we should adopt techniques that we can adapt to best. So my technique is that I stopped looking at law as an academic course, but rather I try to incorporate it as part of my life outside of my study timetable. In my free time, I try to read a case or even just a summary of a case, to always be in tune to what is happening in the legal sphere as well as in society. So this way, I found that my mind is always attuned to the subject matter of my studies, and this has made it easier for me to absorb information. And it's also helped me in learning new concepts in conjunction with concepts I've already come across in my previous years of study. And the merging of old information and new information becomes more seamless for me this way. I've also found that casually reading through my work is also an efficient way of observing information, because the pressure is not on me. When I'm reading through my textbook, like I'm doing it for fun, there's no pressure. I don't feel like, I'm doing this because I need to finish an assignment. And so when the pressure is not on me, it becomes easier for me to absorb as much information at one time as possible. And in addition, for reference, I still vouch for, the old-fashioned method of jotting down notes in your hardcover while reading it out to myself. Because I've read somewhere that the more senses receive a certain piece of information, the easier it becomes to remember. So if I'm writing down information, I'm stimulating my sense of sight. If I'm reading the information out to myself, I'm stimulating my sense of hearing. So those are already two senses that I'm receiving the same information from, and that way it becomes easier for me to remember. And then as for timetables, I do have a timetable. That form of time structure, it makes it easier for me to study all my modules, and it ensures that I don't study too much of one module, a little bit of another module, and none of the other module. So me personally, I do an average of 5 modules per semester. Therefore, in one day, I try as much as possible to do at least 2 or 3. That way I keep the balance. I have a 5-6 day study week. And if I'm doing 2 or 3 modules per day, then I cover a lot of content in 1 week.
In 1 week.
About to be written. I'm adequately prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that. With this whole COVID-19 thing, like universities have been forced to utilize online learning. But I don't think this is a new thing for you, Lethabhabo, as UNISA is using distant learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you guys encountered any challenges, or do you continue to encounter any challenges with distant or e-learning? I'll start with you, Lethabhabo.
So for me, the transition from I guess the little bit of contact learning that I get, because the majority of my course I'm doing it independently. So the little bit of contact learning that I had and transitioning from that to completely e-learning has been a relatively smooth transition. I haven't had too much problems with it. And by virtue of UNISA being an open distance learning institution, it's
Yeah.
always been a competent institution that's been like I said, competent enough to accommodate all its learners, for full on learning experience, e-learning experience, sorry.
Yeah.
And therefore, on that basis, the transition was not really too rough on us.
Yeah.
And I definitely have to commend my university for doing all that they possibly could to ensure that our learning experience hasn't been hampered in any way during the start of the pandemic up to date.
Yeah.
And despite the small glitch at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, everybody was just panicking. We didn't know what was going on. And despite that little glitch at the beginning, I think that things have been falling into place seamlessly. And personally, I really haven't been having many problems with regards to my
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah. All right, Lisha.
Well, for me, I think it was an issue of adaptability, right? Because we were not gradually transitioned into e-learning. Do you get me? Because we were straight from contact learning to e-learning. So it was a thing of at some point there was no communication and you're at home, and now you're just trying to navigate the whole thing on your own. And it came to a realization that listen, it is part of the dynamics of e-learning for you to be active in your own learning, right? So for me, that was just that. And it
Yeah.
was not just adaptability on my part, but also on the part of lecturers also, because it was something that is new to everyone. Coupled with that also, it has to be the data issue, because we receive data at a later stage and you're already panicking because you are seeing these other institutions, they are working and you're here and there's nothing happening. Also coupled with the
Yeah.
network issue, also being from rural areas, you're just trying to have access, but you have difficulty doing that. But other than that, it's been an experience, and I would say we have actually managed to get the grasp of it, and we are doing quite okay. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that, Lisha. Um, I like what you mentioned with the issue of network access to data and so forth and so on. Like there's already, as you may know, I'm assuming, not that you do know, that there's inequalities in the South African higher education system, right? So this access to devices, data, connectivity issues, and so forth, and with the sudden introduction of online learning, that in my view like perpetuates these inequalities rather. So do you guys agree with that? Can you express any views? I'll start with you, Lihle.
Okay, cool. I do agree with that sentiment, and it is something that is coupled with universities, as you say, having previously disadvantaged in those who are actually able to keep up, right? And it
Yeah.
is something we cannot ignore. um, One, however, cannot just be naive and ignore the fact that it is factors that are material, and therefore the world has to acknowledge and take cognizance of the fact that there is universities of this nature, and therefore there has to be some sort of accommodation in as far as people, students from those universities are concerned. It has, yes, introduced, inequalities, and in the sense that, because I had an application, right, and now the time period I'm given to submit my final results actually is going to be very difficult for me, because I still will be dealing with my my final results.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now the issue I have is that the time frame they've given me is not accommodative of my period, in as far as far as my institution is concerned. So that on its own introduces now a hurdle for me to go on, especially as a final year law student, you get me? Because now it's a thing of I have to find other contingencies or other means to ensure that this year alone does not go wasted. So yes, it is things when you think of, you realize that as a person who's coming from a university or institution that is previously disadvantaged, you have to go an extra mile in ensuring that in as far as it is factors that are known by the world, you however have to take it upon yourself to ensure that they do not affect you in as much. So yeah, that is as far as I can go in as far as that is concerned.
Wow. Thank you for that submission, Lihle. Lethabhabo?
Okay. So if there was any ignorance, whether it was deliberate or it was genuine, around the appalling state of affairs, the state of affairs at higher learning institutions, then our current circumstances, during this pandemic, have completely eradicated any evidence of that ignorance. So during what we would call considerably normal times, and during those times, the situation was already dire before the pandemic. Already students had loads and loads of issues with regard to connectivity, obviously, with regard to tuition, with regards to data costs, and it's always been an issue, And then in the face of this pandemic that we're going through, all of those blemishes and all of those inefficiencies by higher learning institutions have become vastly exposed, if I can say so. So because almost all universities have made a shift to online registration and to e-learning, subsequently, there's been a decline in the number of children that are applying and the number of children that are registering, So the issue presently now is not only just about tuition. The struggle today has extended to infrastructure as well as resources for learners as well. So even though e-learning seems like the safest bet, from when you're looking at it from a health perspective, it seems like the safest bet. It doesn't mean that e-learning doesn't bring about its own host of problems, And this is honestly a cause for concern, because I say this because an investment in education is an investment into the future of this country. And now the narrative that this pandemic is bringing to light is that our own government and higher learning institutions are not adequately equipped to carry their own future on the back, because what their service delivery, so to speak, is not sufficient to supply all learners with what they need, all the materials and all the resources they need to advance themselves academically. So during normal times, we were barely scraping by, and now the scene at higher learning institutions is it's terrible. It's obscenely grotesque. So it's been no secret that the youth of this country generally do not have the means to advance themselves in this world. They are heavily, heavily reliant, and they're dependent on, the government. And unfortunately, the government is not really in much of a position to attend to all of these needs at a rate that is quick enough to alleviate the problems that the youth is going through, or rather students are going through. And a vast majority do not have access to gadgets, and therefore many of them are devoid of all digital skills. So e-learning on that basis alone has become a huge challenge for a lot of people, for a lot of students, and I guess some lecturers as well, who prefer the old methods of teaching. They have to adapt to it, and that might have posed a challenge to them as well. And then on campus, you often have the liberty to make use of computer labs, for all your research purposes without worrying about the data costs. But working from home, it inevitably means that you need to buy data to further yourself academically, So universities have been giving us, I speak for mine, and I imagine it's the same with other universities, if not all. They've been giving us data for exams, and that data has been expiring shortly after the exam period. After the exam period, it's a short break, registration, we're going into it again. So we need data to research for assignments. We need data to familiarize ourselves with concepts. We need data to interact with fellow learners when we are lost on certain things, And another issue that I've found, that I've had to go through is the issue of correspondence. There are so many, because of the shift to e-learning, there are so many learners that lecturers have to interact with on certain platforms, and sometimes they cannot reach you in time. Like I have a problem today, I send an email today, and my email only gets answered on Friday, but I want to finish this assignment today. So that poses also a huge problem. And then learners cannot be afforded half an opportunity. You cannot expect learners, you cannot expect learners cannot expect to offer learners an opportunity to get a higher education and then leave it to the same learners to ensure that they have the necessary gadgets and data to advance and fulfill their academic journey. You cannot possibly expect to be met halfway by someone that is hanging on a thread financially. That is just not a viable solution to things. And clearly there's a stark dichotomy between what the people need and what the government thinks it's doing to address all of these needs. And this is why the whole process seems to be either stagnant or regressive in the eyes of those people who have to bear the brunt of what we would call this poor service delivery. And unless common ground is found, between students and governments or higher learning institutions, this problem will continue to prevail, and it will continue to thrive. And it will always be much the detriment of the people who need it most. And I think that's the most painful reality that we have to deal with regard to the whole thing of higher learning, the need for data, the need for the resources like gadgets to advance ourselves during the time of a pandemic. The situation was already dire before the pandemic, and for some people, a high university education is, or rather, let me say, higher learning has always been the way out. Some people come from poor backgrounds, some people come from backgrounds where they're not doing well financially, and this is the biggest goal. This is their last hope, and for them to be thrust into a pandemic and not have the necessary resource to advance themselves, obviously you'll feel like you're stuck. There's no other solution. So for those people that are heavily reliant on being subsidized, or they're being heavily reliant on the resources that government has to offer them, they're really the ones who bear the brunt of this.
All right. Thank you so much, guys, for your submissions. They are really insightful. This one is just my last question. I feel like with the introduction of the fourth industrial revolution, there was already a shift from contact learning to e-learning, but then it was obviously a slow process. But then COVID-19 came, and just as a catalyst, and fast forwarded the whole process. So with that shift, do you think universities should just, as it is happening now, just move from contact learning to e-learning, or you'd suggest that e-learning should be introduced gradually? For instance, with as already exists, like online libraries, online research gates, and all of that, like those resources, just a gradual shift, or the way the status quo should just continue, in your view? I'll start with you, Lihle.
Thank you, Zach. Well, for me, I think it should be with, contact learning. Because in as far as we are concerned, we have preferences, right? Some people actually prefer contact learning, some people prefer e-learning, but we can't ignore the fact that we are, transitioning into a world that is cognizant, or rather recognized for IR and everything. So I would prefer that we have both, and then through reflection or other statistics, then realize that actually most people, in as far as we are flexible, prefer online, or rather they mostly use online learning. Then it is then we can then say we can use this particular form, but not just as a matter of not giving people options to say, I want to use this. We have to be spoiled for choice to say this is what we want to use and incorporate this one, or rather this is what is working for us, because at the end of the day, it is us who are subjected to such difficulties and everything in as far as the whole thing is concerned. So for me, I think it's just a matter of trying to find out what it is that people mostly use and what it is that most people mostly prefer, without ignoring the fact that it is a factor that will remain and be, e-learning is something that is here to stay. So we just make it work for everyone without having others excluded because of finances, as Rita was already said, because of certain difficulties. So we have to be accommodative of imperative foundation of one's right to education and access to education. So it is just a matter of ensuring that everyone is accommodated.
Lethabhabo?
Okay. So in this instance, and obviously under the circumstances that we find ourselves in, we were not given the liberty to decide. The circumstances chose for us. We had to do the e-learning if academic years were to go forward as planned. So so without the pandemic, let's say the pandemic did not exist. I would say that without the pressure of a pandemic or any other factor forcing us to make a decision with regards to whether we keep contact learning, whether we incorporate e-learning into contact learning, or whether we shift completely to online learning, without the pressure of any factor um, forcing us to decide, I would say that it would be better to incorporate e-learning into contact learning, and then if the institutions then decide to undertake, a full-on e-learning experience, then e-learning would if this was the case, if we were to incorporate e-learning into contact learning, it would be easier to phase out the contact learning gradually and phase in the e-learning gradually. That way people will become more accustomed to it. People are generally so averse to change, and people find comfort in familiarity. So if you were to take them from contact learning and thrust them straight into e-learning, they might take a while to adjust. But if you were to incorporate the two, simultaneously and have a bit of both at one time, it would be easier to find the correlation between the two. It would be easier to navigate and maneuver between the two. So this way, the learners and the lecturers alike would have enough time to acclimate to the dynamics of e-learning. The more fluent they both are in the digital language of e-learning, the more beneficial the learning experience would be to students, and the easier it would be for lecturers to teach the students using this medium of teaching. For a wholesome learning experience, it would be almost imperative for both learners and teachers to be well equipped to navigate the infrastructure and the platforms that would be used for e-learning. And I guess for me to advocate for the complete shift to e-learning with solid conviction will depend on a myriad things, and the most important of these things would be whether it will be inclusive and accommodating to people from disadvantaged backgrounds and those who do not have the
surely.
means to make that shift out of their own pocket. So if the answer to these questions is then yes, whether it will be accommodating to them, um, then, and if also there can be some kind of watertight plan to guarantee the fruition of such a plan, then I would certainly vouch for e-learning. It would make education more accessible to those people even in the most remote parts. Yeah.
Oh, wow, thank you so much, guys. I'd like to thank you for your time and your substantive views as well as reflection on e-learning. Like you said a lot, I learned some new stuff, things that I never thought of, in respect of challenges, as well as what you just mentioned now, Lethabhabo, the issue of access to education. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you guys both for the opportunity. Thank you for your time. I've also learned a lot. Yeah, thank you. And then congratulations and good luck with this platform. I think it's an outstanding platform for lawyers and law students. And yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from me. I've also